How do you finish the omoplata?
For the omoplata, you got to get around that neck. Squeeze on that thing. You feel me?
The omoplata is supposed to be a shoulder lock, right? Well, I watched every high-level omoplata finish I could find, and almost half weren't even shoulder locks, but were strangles. In fact, I also discovered there is one surprising position responsible for most omoplata finishes. And spoiler alert, it's not the traditional one you might be thinking of. In this video, we're going to break down exactly why so many omoplata finishes aren't shoulder locks, reveal the unexpected position that dominates finishes from this position, and show you how this insight might just completely change the way you approach the omoplata. And if you don't already know me, my name's Sean. I'm a BJJ black belt, software engineer, and coach at Gracie, Brooklyn. I have a newsletter where I go deeper into the topics of my videos, like the stats in this one. If you sign up, I'll send you free instructional content from grapplers like Cummings, Jason Rao, Mason Fowler, and many more. And if that sounds interesting to you, you'll find a sign up link down in the description below. And with that out of the way, let's get this thing started. The omoplata ranks as one of the most uncommon submission finishes you will see in high-level competition, coming in at less than 2% of all submissions. To see exactly where it ranks compared to other submissions and who the top finishers are, I made a recent video covering this topic. So I've been studying the omoplata a lot recently, and I was curious if I could find any insights or patterns by watching competition. Traditionally, when we think of the omoplata, we think of it as a submission that rotates our opponent's shoulder beyond its normal range of motion, similar to a kimura. However, when I actually sat down and watched high-level matches that were labeled as omoplata finishes, something stood out to me right away. Of the 32 matches I can find with video, 15 or almost half weren't even pure omoplata shoulder locks. In fact, while the omoplata position was used to control opponents, it was often a choke that led to the tap rather than the shoulder lock. And to prove my point, here's a brief highlight of chokes from the omoplata position. Alright, so that leaves the question, why do so many omoplata finishes come from some form of choke? One of the reasons why I think this is the case is while it can be quite easy to get your legs into the omoplata position, it's actually quite difficult to then break your opponent down and then move their shoulder beyond its normal range of motion. And at higher levels, opponents are much more familiar with the common escapes and counters to the omoplata submission, and in competition, opponents are less likely to tap early on from the position itself. But there's something else I learned from watching all these videos. There's one particular position where most the omoplata finishes occur, and it's something you may have already noticed from the clip so far.
Where do you finish the omoplata?
I get the far underhook and pull them on top of me. That's the crucifix. Now they ain't going nowhere.
Most omoplata finishes were not from the traditional position you often see taught in class, where you break down their posture, sit up, scoot back, and lean forward. In fact, only 8 of the 32, or about 25% of the finishes, were from this traditional sit-up finishing position. In fact, the majority, or 18 of the 32, were from this position here or some minor variation of it, where your opponent is seated with their legs out in front of them, you have an underhook or maybe a lapel grip, and then you're maintaining an omoplata configuration with your legs. This position has a lot in common with the crucifix, as you're behind your opponent and perpendicular, trapping their arm with your legs. But the big difference here is that your leg is over their shoulder with their arm tucked in, trapped behind them. And personally, I would argue that this position is even stronger than the traditional crucifix because of the way their arm is trapped behind them in a compromising position. I also think it's a better position to finish from than the traditional sit-up omoplata position. One big reason why is that the traditional omoplata finish offers many opportunities to escape. They can roll forward, roll sideways, cartwheel over, posture up, and so on. The tricky thing about the Omoplata Crucifix position we've been talking about here is that it's a much more difficult position to escape, and you still have access to attack the shoulder from here. And to show you what I'm talking about here, we have a really good example from Andrew Wiltse, who's down here on the bottom. He's going to be playing open guard, and his opponent's going to get an underhook on him, and he's going to create an angle here, and he's going to set up the Omoplata. Now right away here, notice as he sits up to get that seatbelt grip, and his opponent is immediately going to posture, and he's going to use that as an opportunity to enter this crucifix position here. He falls backwards right away, and I want you to watch as he creates space and scoots back. So the opponent falls up over him right here, scoots out, scoots out, legs come out in front of him, and he keeps scooting out to create that angle to finish the omoplata shoulder lock right here. See, as the arm's trapped behind him here. He also uses that seatbelt grip to extend him out and create more pressure there. While there were a few shoulder lock finishes from this Omoplata Crucifix position, like what we just saw, what's really interesting to me is that every single one of the chokes were from this position. This is because much like the regular crucifix position, you have easy access to threaten your opponent's neck. So now if this position is so strong, that leaves the question, how do you get there? Paul Schreiner, former head instructor at Marcelo Garcia's in New York City, and who recently moved to Los Angeles and opened up his own academy, Frogtown Jiu-Jitsu, has a really good entry that I've been having some success with. So instead of trying to sit up to finish the omoplata, he likes to instead invert his knee here, which gives him easier access to their back so he can pull them on top of him. It might free their elbow, but it still traps their arm in a position he refers to as the Armbind Crucifix.
Okay, I'm going to keep his arm. Come back. I still have that grip on his collar to prevent his posture. And I'm going to feel my opponent in this situation usually has base, or maybe I've put him in omoplata sequences before and I want to show him something else. So I'm going to start to switch the grips, okay, controlling his hip, his pants, even his leg at first to make sure he doesn't jump over my body. And now, when it's possible, I'm going to start to move my hip away and start to hide my knee inside. The difference is from going for like an arm lock position where I want the elbow line on my side of my hip and thigh. In this instance, I want his elbow line on the far side. I want a free elbow, okay? So I have to be very tight. I maintain a grip. As I move, I push his elbow out, and I'm gonna lock and maintain this grip so I don't lose my opponent, and start to pull myself up at this point and find the far corner of his body, okay? When I have the far corner of his body, let's just scoot back a little more. I'm just going to start to tip my opponent here. So you can see the lock that I have. My foot is flexed. Okay, his wrist is trapped on my inner thigh. His elbow is free. The other arm I want to keep out of the game. I'm going to put behind my back, or I'm going to control over the line of his knuckles, holding the pinky edge of his hand. My free arm is attacking the neck. And I'm gonna look to attack, in this instance, a gi choke. So I make a deep grip, and I'm gonna bring my elbow back and down his body, here. So, unlike the Omoplata Crucifix position that we see sometimes when we chase our opponent as they roll, that attacks the shoulder. This lock doesn't attack the shoulder. It binds the arm, but gives us better connection to their back. So we're more lined up for a better option to attack the neck.
By the way, that clip was from one of Paul's courses available on Digitsu called Super Drags, which includes omoplata entries using drags with opening the elbow, which I found to be quite similar to some of the more common entries in the competition footage. If you want to check it out, there's a link in the description below. Another common way to get to the Omoplata Crucifix, like we saw in the Wiltse match, is that as you go to sit up, but after you've secured either their waist or a far side underhook, you simply let them posture up. And as they do this, you simply maintain your grips, accept this movement, fall backwards, and pull them on top of you. So another really good entry is to use their forward roll. With me in here, we have Gracie here on bottom. He's going to clear these knees. He's going to set up the Omoplata, and watch as he gets that far grip. His opponent's going to roll forward, and then they're going to end up right here in this Omoplata Crucifix position, where now Clark has access to his neck, and he's going to finish the choke. Beautiful. So our next match is Gracie again, the iconic photogenic jiu-jitsu guy match here. So Gracie's attacking the Omoplata. Now watch as they hit the ground here. He's going to look for that crucifix position and the choke. But then they're going to end up here, maybe sensing the danger, but they're going to end up for a traditional Omoplata, but his opponent's going to roll through, and right away, the choke's on, and the match is over. Another really cool entry with Gracie, very similar. He's going to sit up, he's going to control that far waist, but this time his opponent, instead of rolling forward, he's going to roll sideways and shoot that arm through. Now watch as Clark stays on him here. He rolls through, he falls back right into that Omoplata Crucifix, and uses that to attack the choke. And he gets the finish. So you might be noticing a theme here. So what you can do is that once you get that far side, waist or underhook control, you can essentially use your opponent's defenses to the traditional Omoplata finish to funnel them into the Omoplata Crucifix. And this brings us to our next important insight about the Omoplata.
Why even bother with low percentage submissions?
Because they still force reactions. People panic and open up other attacks like arm bars. You just have to know what to look for.
One useful way to think about the Omoplata is not necessarily as a submission, but as a series of positions that give you greater control over your opponent, which is the topic I discussed in more detail in a recent video. One piece of evidence for this idea is how often opponents spend minutes, sometimes almost entire matches, stuck in the Omoplata position, trying to defend, much like you'd see from other forms of guard. And just like other guard positions, it can be used to fatigue your opponent, attack their posture, and open opportunities for submissions and ways to advance your position. This is one of the reasons why the Omoplata is still a powerful technique, even though the submission itself is pretty rare. And it's also why you shouldn't just focus solely on the most common submissions, like the armbar, chokes from the back, or the heel hook. For example, everyone knows the basic Americana from mount, and finishes of this submission are few and far between at high levels. This is because everyone's familiar with it, and it's simple and intuitive to defend. Once someone goes to set up the Americana and the hand is pushed in position, you can connect your other hand to resist and move to your side, bring your elbow back to your body. However, this defense is very predictable and opens opportunities for higher percentage submissions like the armbar, or exposes the back for greater control. The Omoplata shoulder lock can work very much the same way. You can use the threat of it to force your opponent to react with very predictable and limited escapes and counters. This can lead to even more dominant positions, sweeps, or other submissions. And like we saw today, it can funnel them into the Omoplata Crucifix, where you can also threaten the choke. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching.